Tuscany, the region of Florence, Italy, is famous worldwide for its Chianti wines. Though the image of Chianti is often one of raffia-covered flasks, Tuscany also produces some of the greatest wines of Italy. In the Tuscan hills, each vineyard is different from the next due to the variations in the soil and climate, which also help to produce generous wines. Some Chiantis are rather fresh and easy, while others, like the Chianti Classico, are richly elaborated and capable of evolving with age. Besides the Chianti Classico, the wines of Tuscany made from the local grape variety Sangiovese are mostly classical reds, like Brunello di Montalcino and Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. These wines, legendary for their powerfulness and longevity, can require years of aging to attain their peak development. They also carry a high price tag. Besides these cult wines, the Vernaccia di San Gimignano, made from the ancient grape variety Vernaccia, is the region's signature white wine. Here we are at Gaiolo in Chianti, where Chianti Classico was born. It belonged to my great-great-grandfather in the 19th century. He invented the recipe of Chianti Classico. With Sangiovese grapes and other varieties from the region, like Canelao and Mamolo, there are many. Sangiovese was chosen for its quality and its taste. We have around 20 hectares of vineyards and 20 hectares of olive groves. Olive trees are widely grown in the Chianti Classico region of Tuscany, and we grow many too. We farm organically without using chemical treatments. The grass is removed mechanically. It is very important to respect nature. Montalcino is a territory of 24,000 hectares, 15,000 of which are forested. There are about 2,500 hectares of vineyards planted with different grape varieties, including Brunello, Montalcino, Sant'Antimo, Moscatello, and others. Next to that, there are 500 hectares of olive groves. The remaining land is used for growing cereals and wheat. Here's the property of the Franceschi family. It's a historical property since 1894. It has helped make Brunello di Montalcino known and appreciated throughout the world. The current owners keep managing and maintaining the estate as the grandparents did.
Secondo quanto aveva iniziato i nonni, ovvero sia
On est à San Gimignano, donc c'est une ville historique.
We are in San Gimignano. It is a medieval town known for its tower and wine. As early as 1200, the white grape variety, Vernaccia, was already being grown in the region, and especially in this domain. They have maintained the traditional Sangiovese and Vernaccia too, of course. This historical wine was already being produced in the Middle Ages. It inspired Michelangelo's illustrations of the Divine Comedy. It also inspired Boccaccio and many others. We may say that this wine was an inspiration to poets and writers. Even the Medici, who were the great rivals of our family at the time, drank our Vernaccia. We found copies of orders in the family archives, proving this diplomatic connection. This wine managed to reconcile the two families.
Derrière moi, vous voyez un document.
Behind me, you can see the document that proves that Cusana and the wine estate existed as early as 994.
Donc, en effet, c'est un acte notarial.
It is a notarial act that testifies to the Property Act of the Cusana Tower.
De la tour de Cusona.
Here is the family tree of the Guicciardini Strozzi family. It runs from the 13th century to the present day. There were many important figures within the family who played their part in history. For example, the historian Francesco Guicciardini, who wrote the Storia d'Italia, History of Italy. He was contemporary of Machiavelli, who worked as his secretary and the beginning of his career. This is also our great-grandfather, who was a Minister of Agriculture and Foreign Affairs. He married Luisa Strozzi. This marriage was the last union to have fusioned the two families. There is also Piero, a great-grandfather, my father, and, up there, my sister and myself. There is another branch linked to England. Our family was related to Winston Churchill. In 1705, a family member wed a Duke of Marlborough. There is also another branch related to Lisa Ghiardini, better known under the name Mona Lisa. She was a real woman. She really existed. Leonardo painted her. Everything is registered historically. Her husband, Francesco, had commissioned the portrait. She was part of our grandmother's family. So my sister and I, we are the 15th generation to be directly related to Lisa Ghiardini. The estate's main activity is wine production. Over its 520 hectares, there are 130 hectares of vineyards, the rest is forest and fields. It is still a traditional farming estate. What sets this estate apart is that, thanks to its microclimate, it is a natural reserve of white truffles. This is quite exceptional. Truffles are usually found in the Piedmont and in Umbria. Here, at San Gimignano, we have a natural reserve full of white truffles. It is the region's white gold.
A Montalcino,
At Montalcino and at our property,
I suoli sono molto
the soil varies greatly.
va da terreni alluvionali,
The hills are alluvial,
terreni di medio impasto,
and the
ricchi di
mid-altitude
schiere,
soils,
come in
like
questo
this one
caso,
here,
terreni più
contain a lot of
prettamente
clay.
argillosi.
We purposefully planted vineyards on different types of soil at different altitudes to have different types of wine.
Per avere anche risultati finali vino diversi.
A soil rich in clay, like this one, creates wines that are more colorful, more structured, more powerful. As we ascend the slope, the soil becomes more mixed, and that creates wines that are less structured, more elegant, with less alcohol content and more acidity.
Con meno alcol e più acidità. E dopo la nostra abilità a seconda della
Our work consists in using these different elements to make blended wines and to obtain the best possible results.
migliore possibile.
Ce sont des marnes
The backbone of the limestone hills is truly impressive. What we see here now that the vineyard is planted is nothing in relation to what was here before. There were huge rocks that were 2 to 3 meters high and wide. Moving one rock required 3 men, and then they had to break each rock into smaller bits. We buried them deep, around 4 meters deep, and above them we placed smaller rocks. It costs a lot of money to break rocks and bury them, but it is fundamental to wine growing. It helps drain the soil and helps the roots to dig down deep. Rocks give wine a mineral taste. So a plot of land with rocks creates a soil that is not too fertile, a soil that will not rush the plant. Like I said, having a greater altitude is important for wide temperature ranges. As you saw earlier, there was a lot of fog this morning, but here there's very little. For example, we're now harvesting the grapes. We have just started because the grapes are ripe, but for us, fog is a lot more bothersome than rain. That's why vineyards are located on higher hills, where there is adequate ventilation and little humidity. Being at a higher altitude is important in the summer too. That way we avoid excess heat. It's hot here in summer, but less so compared to other areas. This year we had an extremely hot summer in comparison to the past 20 years. Altitude helps us to temper that heat and prevents the grapes from undergoing heat shock. This region is great for winemaking for several reasons. First, due to the soil. And secondly, due to the climate. As you can see, the sea is on the left and the mountains on the right. So it's a hot but very well ventilated climate. In the summer and until the harvest, the grapes can ripen steadily. We do not have to fight mold issues. The wind helps keep the grapes and vines healthy. The climate of Montalcino greatly influences the ripening of Sangiovese grapes. Here at Montalcino, Sangiovese reveals its full potential. It can produce very different wines. They're different wines, and their quality depends on the location of the vineyards. on the various altitudes of the vineyards.
In cui sono posizionate le vigne. The
ripening process varies according to the various soil types. These wines can be more elegant, more acidic, with less alcohol content. In the southern area, the wines are more structured, more muscular. They contain a greater alcohol content, but they are still of excellent quality.
Aujourd'hui, en effet, dans les Chianti Classico, on peut aussi ajouter des...
Today, in the Chianti Classico region, there are international grape varieties like Merlot, Cabernet, etc.
In terms of wine varieties, we mentioned the Vernaccia variety that is specific to the region. Vernaccia is the name of the white wine variety that was already being produced in 1200. It was known as the wine of Tuscany until the 19th century, when Chianti, made from Sangiovese grapes, became better known.
Et donc la Vernaccia était un peu oubliée, a été un peu mise dans le coin.
Vernaccia was a bit forgotten, left aside. Our father was the first president of Vernaccia when it was revived in the 1970s. Vernaccia regained its fame worldwide, and especially within certain markets in certain countries.
We
are very devoted to this wine variety, since it represents the tradition and history of our wine production. We also have the great native red wine variety, Sangiovese. It is much more known. It is used in making Chianti and popular wines like the Super Tuscans, as American wine critics call them. They represent the Italian Grand Cru.
Des vins italiens.
Le cépage du Sangiovese.
The Sangiovese grape variety is widely planted in the Chianti Classico region because Chianti is made with 80% of this variety. The other grapes that are used in Chianti are varieties that blend well with Sangiovese. That's why I prefer using grape varieties like Canaiolo, Colorino, and Pugnitello.
Ce sont des cépages qui ont une balance très délicate et un goût très fin, un goût.
They have a very fine taste and are delicately balanced. It's easy to destroy the balance of this grape variety. That's why the grape varieties that are added to Sangiovese must respect the signature traits of Sangiovese.
Respecte beaucoup le caractère du Sangiovese.
We have vineyards that are many years old. The oldest is called Vigneto San Marcellino. It produces a vintage that is listed in the top Chianti Classico wines. These vineyards are 48 years old, so they are getting pretty old, but I have a good harvest nearly every year.
Presque chaque année, je fais un petit vignoble. La passata, c'est... Non, per rosato, no. Pour le Merlot, avec lequel on produit un vin qui s'appelle Jeremia.
We produce a wine called Jeremia. It's a mix of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, which are both grape varieties from Bordeaux.
Les cépages bordelais. Et c'est avec le San Marcellino.
Jeremia and San Marcellino, which we produce in the 48-year-old Sangiovese vineyard, are the two major wines of Montegrosso.
C'est un Merlot Cabernet.
Merlot and Cabernet is widely planted here because they share many characteristics with Chianti Classico regarding its minerality, acidity, balance, and a powerfulness that is never too heavy because the acidity keeps it fresh and light. It's a Merlot Cabernet that maintains the strong character of Gaul in Chianti. That's very important to me. Otherwise, it would be like any of the world's million other Merlot Cabernets. And I feel the world does not need another Merlot Cabernet. The harvest lasts about 3 weeks or 40 days. Usually, the harvest begins in mid-September and finishes around the 10th to the 20th of October. It all depends on the season and the vintage.
Ça dépend de la saison et des millésimes. C'est le merlot qu'on commence.
We start with the Merlot because it ripens early.
Le plus précoce.
Then the Sangiovese.
On commence avec le Sangiovese, le Cabernet Sauvignon.
Then the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Canaiol, and the Colorino. Each grape variety ripens at a different time. Right now, we are harvesting the Sangiovese to produce rosé. The grapes are not fully ripe yet, but that is necessary in producing a rosé. Otherwise, the wine will be too structured, too strong.
Trop structuré et trop fort.
This bunch of grapes is not so dense, yet it still has a bit of mold. It is removed with scissors. The grapes that are stuck together and moldy are struck with the scissors. It's very important to remove it. The moldy grapes cannot be added to the wine. Rosé must be produced using perfect grapes. This work takes a lot of time, but it is essential to the quality of the wine.
Sicuramente in Toscana
Sangiovese is the most cultivated grape variety in Tuscany.
Negli anni ogni azienda
Over time, different producers work to improve its quality.
migliorando quello che è la qualità del Sangiovese. Ricercando
They sought grapes like these,
con l'acido
which are
più
smaller,
piccolo, più spargolo, in modo da avere
and
una
grapes that are more
migliore
spaced out so as to ripen better,
avere
and especially to obtain a better pulp-to-liquid ratio.
liquido, che vuol dire che essendo piccolo l'acino, la sua buccia è il rapporto superiore
Because they're small, the grapes have a better pulp-to-sugar ratio.
che c'è all'interno e questo permette di avere vini maggiormente colorati. Non solo, un grappolo come questo più aperto
This one is not so
si
bunched.
mantiene anche in caso di
It will remain
mantenimento
healthy
in
even in
maniera
bad weather,
che non un grappolo
as opposed to a
con
vine that produces fat grapes that are bunched together.
Tutte le aziende hanno
Over the years, and with the help of university research, all the wine-producing estates selected Sangiovese varieties that have these characteristics.
selezionando queste caratteristiche e il risultato fatto negli anni
The result is definitely positive.
sicuramente importante. Per capire anche il momento
Laboratory analyses let us know when the grapes are fully ripe,
importanti le analisi
but it is
chimiche.
also important to visually understand when the grapes are ripe.
È importante anche capire visivamente il grado di maturazione delle uve. Un sistema empirico, ma ancora funzionale.
It's an empirical system that has stood the test of time.
Il pennellino rosso
The red part below the peduncle indicates how ripe the grapes are.
di maturazione. Allo stesso tempo
When you chew grapes, you feel the skin.
si capisce lo spessore della buccia. Che se
If it's
spesso
thick,
vuol
the
dire
grapes
che
can
l'uva
stay
può
on the
stare
vine
ancora
for another 15 days.
15-20 giorni perché l'uva è spessa, la buccia è spessa e sana. E allo stesso tempo, vedendo il colore dei
In
vinaccioli,
the same way, if you look at the color of the seeds,
la maturità del
you can understand how ripe they are.
Quando è marrone scuro vuol dire che i
When they're
tannini
dark brown,
eccederà
the tannins have reached their
sono
optimal
tannini
level.
ottimi, non sono tannini verdi acerbi che darebbero problemi al vino. In questo caso
If they're
sono
not green and
tannini molto
acidic,
ottimi. L'uva
they are
è,
perfect,
come stiamo
and the
facendo,
grapes can be
pronta da
harvested.
raccogliere e la stiamo raccogliendo.
From these grapevines, which are among the oldest here, we harvest the grapes and sort them. It is recognized as an AOP. This appellation is particular because it is one of the only ones in Italy where we can produce Vernaccia San Gimignano Reserva. These old vines, whose production is very limited, enable us to harvest grapes that can last a long time. They are very interesting white wines because they have good structure and therefore with an excellent vinification and barrel aging, it is possible to produce vintage wines that keep very well. This bunch of grapes is typical of the Vernaccia San Gimignano grape variety. It has very round grapes. Its characteristic yellow color signals that it is fully ripe, ready to be harvested. The Vernaccia San Gimignano grape variety makes very compact bunches of round grapes. It is special in that its skin is very fine. We must be very attentive and harvest at the right moment to preserve the aromatic part of this grape variety. The black grapes are unloaded in the cellar. We unload them in the wine press, in a machine that separates the grapes from the stalks.
L'operazione importante è di far fare pochi giri alla diraspatrice.
The centrifuge must not turn too much, so as to avoid smashing the grapes.
Una pompa alimenta il tubo e porta.
A pump feeds a pipe that carries the grapes to the cistern where the fermentation process begins.
Di fermentazione. Cisterne termocondizionate.
The cisterns are thermo-conditioned, so if it is cold, the grapes are heated.
Vengono riscaldate tramite glicol caldo. Se invece, come avviene durante la fermentazione,
if, on the contrary, the temperature is above 28 degrees Celsius during the fermentation process, the sensor triggers the cooling system and the temperature is maintained between 26 and 28 degrees Celsius.
Che raffredda la massa e tiene la temperatura tra un range di 26 e 28 gradi centigradi.
This is the zone where grape processing begins. The grapes are unloaded in this funnel, created for this purpose. Then they are unloaded in the machine that destems and crushes the grapes. Then they go directly to the press for the pressing. This is a cooling system. It enables us to change the temperature from the 20 degrees Celsius of the grapes to 13 or 14 degrees. For the white wines, after the harvest, the grapes are directly placed in the wine press. They are pressed, and then only the grape must be fermented, without the skin.
fermentazione a temperatura controllata.
The temperature-controlled fermentation process takes a very long time.
Con temperature di 10-12 gradi. A fine fermentazione,
During fermentation, the temperature is between 10 and 12 degrees Celsius.
Ovvero sia tolta la parte, le impurità che si sono prodotte nella fermentazione, dopodiché
Then the wine is drawn and filtered to remove the impurities that arise during fermentation.
non facciamo
After that,
affinamento
the
in
wine is
legno,
ready to be
ma
bottled.
vendiamo bianchi giovani, freschi, profumati.
The white wines are not aged in wooden casks because they are young wines. They're fresh and floral and must be drunk quickly.
Negli anni anche un rosé.
Rosé wine is also in demand.
E questo lo facciamo sempre con le
It is
uve
also made with Sangiovese grapes.
In questo caso, per dargli un tono
To produce a rosé, we ferment the grape with the skins, then we press it.
fermentazione del mosto per 24 ore sulle bucce, dopodiché pressiamo e facciamo
It is fermented for 15 to 20 days without the skins at 10 to 12 degrees Celsius.
mosto senza buccia, sempre a temperature di 10-12 gradi. Questo
This is
è
important
importante perché
because the
con le
fermentation
temperature
process is
basse
slower in low
la
temperatures.
fermentazione è molto
That way
più
we can
lenta
extract more aroma.
e si estraggono maggiori profumi, maggiori
For
aromi.
young wines that must be quickly consumed, these kinds of parameters are very important.
Sono importanti. Questo è un nostro progetto. Ci
We had
siamo
these
fatti
cisterns
fare
made
queste
according to our needs.
cisterne per come ne avevamo bisogno. Ogni cisterna di fermentazione
Each cistern is linked to a computer that controls the level of fullness and the temperature.
il livello di riempimento, le temperature, impostiamo il numero
Thanks
e
to
la
the
durata
computer,
dei
we can choose at what time to
Possiamo
oxygenate the grape
impostare
must.
quando dare ai mosti l'ossigeno nel momento che serve e questo
That lightens the
oltre
workload of our
che
employees.
alleggerire il lavoro dei dipendenti serve anche a garanzia
It also optimizes work and guarantees quality wines.
facendo ogni tipologia di vino viene seguito, viene
Each type of wine is closely monitored and controlled.
il computer fa fare. È particolare perché permette di fare rimontaggi
This
al
type of
mosto
pump brings the grape must to the surface without
senza
squashing it.
venga schiacciato, ovvero sia ci sono all'interno
The wines
molti
ferment
acidi
in different
interi,
ways
la pompa
and for more or
li
less time.
schiaccia, passano e questo permette di avere
We do
poi
a 10-day
vini,
fermentation time.
con meno feccia, vini più puliti e anche con profumi più netti. I vini fermentano in maniera diversa e in periodi più o meno lunghi a seconda
But for
della
Montalcino
tipologia
Reds,
del
we do
vino.
12 days.
IGT Toscana Sangiovese massimo una fermentazione a temperatura controllata di 10 giorni, mentre sul rosso di Montalcino arriviamo a 12 e sul Brunello
And for
e la
Brunello,
Riserva
on Reserva,
arriviamo da
we do 20
15
to 25
fino a
days,
25 giorni,
so that
perciò
maceration
una
process is much
macerazione
longer.
molto più lunga.
Della nostra cantina molto interessante.
Another very interesting characteristic of our cellar is that before we exclusively used wooden casks for the vinification and aging of the wine.
Sono arrivati questi
And then these cement recipients arrived, built on the spot.
sul posto, cosiddetti sul posto, ecco. E questa cantina
This cellar is 80 years old.
80 anni fa, qui dove insomma
We're among the first in the area to have experimented with this type of structure,
sperimentare all'epoca questo
and it is still today very interesting and very valid. We use it as much as possible.
che noi utilizziamo ovviamente appieno.
We especially use it to ferment the Sangiovese.
La fermentazione del Sangiovese.
Our best vintages are fermented in these truncated cone-shaped casks, like our Super Tuscan, Merlot Cabernet, and our top Chianti Classico, our vineyard's best vintage. They're fermented in these casks. They're used both for fermenting and for the aging of our younger wines. Fermentation is done in the truncated cone-shaped cask made of Allier oak. It is made of French wood. That one will be full tomorrow, with the Merlot grape varieties we saw earlier. It has already been cleaned. You can tell by the smell. The aroma is nice. That's important. We also ferment our wines in cement casks. It's a very traditional way of working, but it includes major technological aspects. The temperature is controlled. There are thermic sensors in the cask that can either increase or decrease the temperature. That is important because we do not add yeast. The fermentation process is set off only by the grape's natural yeast.
Vini di Montalcino.
Montalcino wines are kept in the casks for 3 to 4 years. It is better to use the big casks because they do not release as much of the tannins over the years.
Una cessione inferiore di tannino dal legno rispetto alla piccola botte. Come abbiamo detto, grande botte nel
So Brunello del Montalcino was aged in big casks.
Per l'invecchiamento del Brunello di Montalcino annata e per il Brunello di Montalcino riserva e Paganelli, piccola botte
Del Montalcino reds are aged in small casks because they age faster.
Di Montalcino, che è un vino sempre prodotto con uve 100%.
It is always produced with 100% Sangiovese grapes.
A differenza del Brunello che viene messo in vendita dopo 5 anni.
As opposed to Brunello, which is sold 5 years after the harvest, Montalcino reds are sold only 1 year after the harvest. That is why we keep it in small casks.
In quel caso, almeno per noi, l'utilizzo della piccola botte, la barrique,
Little barrels suffice. We use the big casks for wines that must be aged.
Continuiamo a utilizzare la grande botte di rovere.
Notre top Chianti Classico, le vignoble San-Marcellino.
Our top Chianti Classico, Geremia from the San Marcellino vineyard, is made with Merlot Cabernet grapes.
Et des tonneaux, donc les plus grands, en chêne d'Allier.
It is aged in casks and barrels. The biggest are made from oak from the Allier region of France. We only use oak from Allier because it is very fine oak. It's not too strong. It is important to us that the wood does not hinder the wine's characteristics. They're aged for about 2 years. It depends on the vintage. They're aged anywhere from 19 to 28 months. It develops during that time.
Après ce moment, le vin, on le remet dans le fût
After that, the wine is put back into cement casks for about a month to ensure that the deposits fall to the bottom of the cask.
Et puis, on le met en bouteille, et là-bas, il y a le vieillissement. Le vieillissement en bouteille, c'est absolument très important.
Then they're bottled and aged.
Je vous ai dit tout à l'heure,
bottle aging is very important.
Très intéressant. Et je pense un des meilleurs en Toscane de point de vue de qualité.
Gaiole and Chianti, which is one of the best Tuscan wines in terms of quality, complexity, and structure, has to be bottle aged for a long time before it improves. That is when it acquires its signature roundness. Especially the Sangiovese variety, because when it is young, it is really nervous and tight. The tannins are really a bit tough. It has to be bottle aged before the consumer may enjoy it.
Que les consommateurs peuvent vraiment apprécier et jouir de ce vin.
Ici, c'est la partie où nos,
This is where our wines are fermented, in barrels, and this is where they
C'est
age.
là où ils affinent. Par exemple, la Vernaccia.
The Vernaccia Reserva, for example, is aged here for at least 4 months.
Et en fait, la
It is the
Vernaccia,
first wine to have obtained a denomination here in Italy, the first DOC, Denominazione di Origine Controllata.
ensuite, c'est devenu la première DOCG.
The DOC is similar to the French AOC, Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée.
Ici, vous voyez des pupitres. Donc, en
Here
effet,
you see
c'est la
bottles of
bouteille
our
de
sparkling Spumante di Vernaccia
c'est le
that our
spumante
father
de
produced
Vernaccia
30
que
years
notre
ago.
père a créé il y a 30 ans. Voilà. Ce qu'on appelle spumante.
Spumante denotes a sparkling white wine that is similar to Prosecco, except the Prosecco is a denomination in northern Italy, and it is also the name of a grape variety. So we may not call it Prosecco here in Tuscany, but it is similar in style. Spumante is also a sparkling wine. Here we are in the Sant'Aia wine area, where we produce Vino Santo. It is our traditional Tuscan dessert wine. It is more or less similar to French straw wines or raisin wines.
Ressembler au vin de paille, disons, en France, plus ou moins. Donc, ici, nous sommes sous le toit.
We are under the roof. Vino Santo requires at least 5 to 6 years. It is a very long and natural procedure. We dry the grapes for 2 months. Then we press the juices and put it in small casks or in small or large barrels. It depends. The older and more used the barrel, the better. Then we leave it alone. It ferments naturally over 6 years. This wine endures the 4 seasons, the cold and the heat, over 4 to 5 years. You can imagine what goes on in there. There is a lot of evaporation, a loss of 70% of the product, but it is a Tuscan tradition. The barrels are sealed with cement, but since wood breathes, evaporation necessarily occurs. There are 2 explanations for the wine's name, Vino Santo, the holy wine. First, because this wine is used in church. Second, because vinification begins in November and December, around All Saints' Day.
Donc c'est un peu la Toussaint. Voilà, ça c'est l'explication.
Over the years, Brunello has become more and more known throughout the world. Today, nearly 60 to 70% of Brunello wines are exported. Its main destinations are the United States, Germany, and Northern Europe. An important emerging country where we have deployed our market over the last few years is Brazil. Russia, too. However, despite our efforts, we have not attained the results we hoped for in China.
The first bottle of Vernaccia was made here in Cusona in 1933, so we use the original packaging from 1933. This wine is between a classic Vernaccia and a Reserva. It undergoes fermentation in 3 ways. 1 in steel inox, 1 in casks, and a part of the grape are dried on racks.
Une partie en barrique et une partie des raisins et passerillés.
This creates a slightly original product once it has been blended. The character traits of Vernaccia is the almond and its slight bitterness. This is really the signature trait of this wine. It is a white wine, but it can last for years. In fact, Vernaccia wines are called whites dressed as red because they are like the red wines of white wines.
Più importante dell'azienda.
Let's now move to the estate's greatest wine, the reserve of the Paganelli vineyards. It's only produced in great years. It's a 5-star wine that is produced exclusively with Sangiovese grapes. These grapes come from the Paganelli vineyard, the company's oldest vineyard. It's also one of the oldest Montalcinos. It was planted in 1965. Naturally, the age of this old vineyard influences the wine's quality. The grapes from these old grapevines are much better than the grapes from young vines.
The tannins are still present. It is still young, given the fact that it is a wine that can last for years. But you can feel the strength of Sangiovese. Our goal is to reveal Tuscany when you drink it. You drink this wine, you think, this is Tuscany. It is very important to us to create products that are linked to our terroir.
De créer des produits qui sont liés à notre terroir.
Je pense que vraiment, on sent bien que ce vin montre vraiment.
I think this wine truly lets you feel the land where it was produced.
Très délicat. Déjà, on le voit bien par,
it has a very delicate aroma. You can tell both by its nose and visually. Its color is typical of Sangiovese. It has a ruby color, like the jewel that women love because it is very expensive. It's a very beautiful color. Sangiovese really has a brilliant ruby color. It is typical of Sangiovese.
Du Sangiovese. Sont tous les trois des vins où on voit bien.
These 3 wines really exhibit the character of our terroir. It is very important that all of our vintages exhibit these characteristics to the consumer. I believe these wines go very well with food. In France, like in Italy and the Mediterranean, wine culture is linked to the culture of food and drink. Wine is not drunk as an aperitif nor after a meal. It is consumed with food. It goes with conviviality and joie de vivre. So the characteristics of wine must not prevent it from being consumed while eating. Food is also better appreciated with wine. The wine should be fresh and elegant. All of these wines are slightly acidic. These wines can be aged for a long time if they are well kept, and it depends on the vintage. San Marcellino and Geremia can potentially be aged for 15 to 25 years if they are well preserved. Of course, Chianti Classico cannot be aged for so long. It attains its peak development after a period of 7 to 10 years.